All right, we are back. So you might think, oh, is it still a hazardous waste when you maybe add some water to it or you add some dirt to it or something along those lines. So it is still considered a hazardous waste unless once you mix it with something else, that one of those hazardous characteristics that we just looked at, no longer um, it exhibits itself. Um, or if it's wastewater, it goes under clean water, and there is some sort of extremely minor loss during manufacturing. So those are exemptions to the hazardous waste rules. But if you're doing this on purpose to make it less hazardous, then it's a treatment. So then it goes under the treatment rules. Um, Same kind of rules for derived from, right? So any waste that's derived from the treatment of a hazardous waste is a hazardous waste unless it no longer exhibits one of those hazardous characteristics. Okay, so here, how do we figure out if it's a hazardous waste? Is it solid? If it is, if it's, is it there an exclusion? Um, then these are the times when it's not subject to RECRA subtitle C, right? We're still on D. Is it listed? Then and if it's delisted, so that's how you know. It's kind of just a nice little flow chart here, which me talking it through, but you can look through the picture in the PowerPoint. Um, Anything can contained in the contained in rule. If there's like I don't know, a pillow that's soaked in a hazardous waste, it's also a hazardous waste. Okay. So, one of the things, if you go back to the beginning where they talk about, we're trying to reduce just the amount of waste in general. So, recycling is encouraged under RCRA. Um, so that means, burn these examples would be, recycling, including land disposal, burning to recover energy, which we talked about, that speculative accumulation, which we'll talk about in a second. Um, so things that are solid waste when they are recycled are sludges, byproducts, commercial chemical products, and scrap metal. So EPA tries to use RECRA to deal with waste management, not production of it. And then there's no recycling exception under RCRA if whatever you're making, there's no market for. So this speculative accumulations. So like if you are acquiring plastic for some reason to get some sort of exemption from RCRA or to I don't know. You think it's going to go up in value, but then you don't recycle it. You keep more than 75% in a year and don't recycle it, or there's really no viable market for it. It is excluded from any RECRA recycling exemption. Okay. So this is kind of how RECRA, this is our cradle to grave stuff. We're kind of talking about what's qualified under RECRA, but now we're on to our cradle to grave. So anybody managing, somehow touching hazardous waste has to notify the EPA within 90 days of figuring out that they have hazardous waste. Okay, so any manager can be an owner operator of any treatment, storage, and disposal facility, which are known as TSDFs. They have to give EPA the name, location, and whatever that EPA waste number, the EPA, they will assign a number. They have to identify the sites. And if they don't notify the EPA, that's illegal. Okay, so we deal with generators. Um, and they have to get an ID number from the EPA. So they have to be, kind of licensed with the EPA to if they are producing or generating any hazardous waste. Um, and they have to prepare what's called a manifest. So kind of it's just like a piece of paper that once the waste is created, it's tracked from the beginning and all the steps until it is finally disposed of. So they start the whole process, okay? And before this hazardous waste goes off their site, they have to package it properly and label it properly. Okay, so this is the manifest. Okay, it has the description of the waste, the waste number, the ID number of anybody who's touched it, and the ID number of any um, storage treatment facilities. Um, certification by a certain person that it is appropriately packaged and labels, certification that there is a program in place for this hazardous waste. And then as it goes on, each handler gets a copy of it, and then they complete the next section before it moves on. And if you want to look at what's in there, you can click on that link as well. Okay, so our labels, depending on the characteristic, they have to have the appropriate labeling, right? So this one says danger explosives or flammable or toxic, poison, whatever that is, combustible. It has to be properly labeled and packaging. If they don't get, when it's at your grave part, the manifest goes back to the generator. Okay. And if they don't get that within 45 days, they have to file what we call an exception report with EPA. And then you have to track down where this happened. So that's what the generator does, right? It generates it, it creates the initial manifest, it properly puts it in whatever packaging it is, and properly labels it and moves it on to the next step. Obviously, illegal dumping is bad. RCRA tries to stop this. But anyone who is an illegal dumper or generator, they really don't have these EPA numbers. So it's only if it's kind of reported by someone else. I have a video in a minute on illegal dumping. Well, I'll talk to you about, here you go. Watch that illegal dumping video. But I'm going to keep going. You can just pause me because I kind of barely just started here. Okay, waste minimization, right? We're talking about that's part of RCRA. They have to make an effort, to make as small a volume of hazardous materials as they can. So they have to file reports twice a year with the EPA that talks about how they are trying to minimize waste. Even if they export their waste to a foreign country, so it's not like our problem, they still have to satisfy RCRA. And if you import hazardous waste from a foreign country, you are also a generator. So there's a duty of waste minimization. If you are a small quantity generator, an SQGS, they actually can store smaller quantities of waste on where they are for short periods without a permit, but they still have to follow as a storage facility, but they still have to follow that manifest problem. Okay, so we had our generators, now we have transporters. Okay, those are the ones who move the hazardous waste from one place to another, right? Maybe it's air, road, rail, water, whatever. They have to make sure that what they have follow, you get to keep those labeling and signs. They have to carry out the manifest. They have an EPA number. If there's a spill, they have to report it. They can store stuff for 10 days without a permit. So if you have a small load and you're waiting for a larger load to make your big trip, you can store it for 10 days and you have to keep a copy of the manifest for 3 years. Now, if they alter the waste in any way, treat it or whatever, then they become generators themselves. So that's what a transporter does. Okay, then we have our next step, which are their TSDFs. Those are facilities that either treat, store, or dispose of. They have a special section under RCRA 3004. Okay, so the treatment ones so they're like, okay, I have hazardous waste. I want to make it less hazardous. That's what a treatment facility does to make it safe for transport, or maybe reduce the volume, whatever they do. A storage and disposal facility. So a storage facility might hold it for a temporary period. Disposal is really where you're intending for this waste to be forever. Okay, so these are permitted. They have to, in their application, give them their basic information, location, whatever. And then in Part B, they have to demonstrate that they are compliant with all the RCRA requirements. There's a big process, with including time for public comment, and then they can hold that permit for 10 years. If there is from any of these TSDFs, if there's any release, they have to take corrective action, no matter, even if that facility has been closed. So these facilities, things that they need to have to show RCRA compliance, that there is personnel training, that there is security, right? That like just some kids can't go in and knock over some drums of toxic waste. Financial responsibility is super important because these facilities have to show that they, they have the money to do all of this stuff, and to actually make sure that this facility is secured even after closure phase. Okay, so they have standards for storage tanks, incinerators, whatever. They have to have EPA IDs. They have to make sure what they're getting is what they think they're getting, so they have to sample it to make sure that it's managed properly. So there's a bunch of requirements. There's specific standards for the tanks, the incinerators, the landfills, all the things that they have to store this stuff. Security, they have to have surveillance and barriers, and, personnel, they need alarm system, a way to contact first responders. They need any equipment that to control these spills and fires if they happen to occur. Ways to decontaminate people. Think of the Silkwood shower. There's a video on the Silkwood shower. All different things that they have to do to maintain things. So they have to keep the manifests. They have to send those back to the generator. They keep those manifests for 3 years. They have to do those biennial reports to the EPA, and if there's any accidents. When it's closed, right, we're full up, they call that closure phase. All the RCRA and TSDF requirements apply. The post-closure period is 30 years, and they have to show that they're financially able to support the site during this closure and post-closure phase. Okay. Usually states are work to make sure that their state facilities are complying with RCRA, so they have the state permitting. And then sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's joint permitting. So it really depends on whether the state programs are up to speed, whether or not the states deal with it, but usually they do. And we talked about this a little earlier in the class. There is no preemption of local ordinances. So if a locality or a municipality or a state has higher standards, that's all good. They can have those higher standards as long as they're not less restrictive from the EPA. Okay, we have enforcement, same things that we've had under a lot of our environmental acts, administrative orders, civil actions by private citizens, criminal, no civil rights actions. Kind of learned that when we're talking about environmental justice. You can't use a Civil Rights Act to prosecute under RCRA. You can have fines, you can have prison times, higher fines, the worst that you do. All right, so I am I think I'm going to power through this actually. There's some other that so that's RCRA. There's some other waste acts that I'll talk about for a couple of slides here. The Medical Waste Tracking Act. Um, that it's kind of just a pilot program in some states with standards for tracking medical waste and penalties for violations. So it's really so it's kind of like a guideline for state programs, but it's not mandatory in all states yet. Um, underground storage tanks, right? Think gas station. There are particular rules on those. Um, if we have a leaky underground storage tank, they call that lust. And there is a fund set up to clean those up and to enforce, make sure that um, kind of like a super fund kind of thing. Well, there's a fund for temporary cleanup if it's an emergency thing, and then like money to enforce the underground storage tank rules. Okay, so here's keep hazardous waste out of the environment. So I want you to now watch watch those two supplemental videos. One is the Silkwood shower, the other is the one about hazardous waste disposal. And now take some time to do review questions 1 through 9. Sorry, this one might have been a little longer. I kind of powered through it. All right, and I'll chat with you in the next video when we start talking about TSCA.